class. This is Dr. De La Garza, and this is the Introduction to Communication 300. So I want to start off first by talking a little bit about what to expect from the course, kind of the idiosyncrasies of online learning in these modalities. There's a few things that are a little different about communication theory from other classes you might take. And then I'll talk through some basics of what theory is and try and get you set up for next week when we really start to dive into the content. So first, I just want to let you know right off the bat, COMM theory is a required course for most communication majors to graduate. And one of the things that makes it unique is that because it is a required course, you have to pass with a C or better. A C being defined as 73% or above. So the standard for passing in communication theory is a little bit higher than normal, and that is because it's a graduation requirement. And I just want to let you know that in advance. Oftentimes theory can be difficult because it requires you to take on a new lens, and you have to kind of put your own assumptions to the side. And you have to think in ways that you probably haven't had to think in before. And that can be challenging. And then online courses themselves have their own challenges. They give you a lot of flexibility. They give you a lot of control over your time management. I, as a student, really loved online coursework, but I liked to read and I liked to write. And, so for me, those were just benefits, right? Not everyone loves kind of the isolated feeling when it's just you and the course, and I get that. That can be difficult. And so I want you to think about what it means to be present online. That kind of presence is different than the presence we get in person. When we meet in person, the physical presence, first of all, there's a whole lot of extra information we get just from our bodies, just from the vibe, just from the feelings of the space. And all of that is happening on a very intuitive level. But it's information that you read and your body responds to. And it's how you make sense of things. When you move to mediated communication, phone, even video chats, some of that information is missing. Just because the limitations of the medium mean you can't get it or access it quite as easily. And so it tends to increase what we would consider dissonance, right? Kind of the space between what you're trying to understand and the space between what you're able to get. And so, in order to counter that loss, in order to find kind of equilibrium in the online space, you got to think differently about what presence looks like, okay? Presence means participating in the discussion and in the class as fully as you can. Presence means responding to classmates. Presence means doing all the readings. Presence means listening to the videos and supplemental materials. And presence means, responding directly. If there are questions or concerns, you hit me up on the Canvas. I get back to you. Come to my online office hours if you can. Everything you do to make yourself feel more involved, and there's a lot of data studies that have demonstrated this, increases your likelihood of succeeding in an online class. The problem with online classes is that our culture has taught us to be very passive with viewership. With the mediated experience, it's all done for us. And what you're going to see both online classes, but also when you transition into the workforce and you're having to do online and hybrid meetings, you have to put more of yourself into the online space. You have to try harder. You have to be more disciplined. It's very easy to let these things slide. And so really, I just want to let you know that, you have a lot of control here. But but it's easy to let things slide online, and I recognize that, right? But I also want to highlight that as something that could really limit your success in this class. Um, in face-to-face courses, the schedule is set for you in pretty regular intervals. You'll feel like you have a lot of accountability. Online, the schedule is more flexible, so it's easier to procrastinate. I would recommend setting a weekly routine with your classes, however many you have online. Blocks of time to do the work. Normal classes are Tuesday, Thursday from 1 to 1, from 1 hour to another hour. I would say, put a few hours down every week at a regular time. Engage with the content, think about the things, and then some other time later in the week, really at that point you just need maybe an hour to review and respond and reflect. But that time management is super important. I typically don't allow late work. The reason I don't allow late work is, well, it's twofold. One, deadlines are important, especially as you move into your career. In my work, I do a lot of career readiness. So I go to conferences with employers. I talk to them about skill sets our students need. You got to be able to work under a deadline, and you got to be able to meet those deadlines, and you got to be disciplined enough to set yourself up for that kind of success. That's one. Number two, it really throws off the grading when I have assignments come in late. And I know that doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense, but I teach like 150 students. And so I typically need to grade things in batches. I do almost all of my gradings on Saturdays, right? Because there's no other time during the week for me to sit and grade 150 essays, except my Saturdays. So, in that regard, when people are late, it throws off and it adds, and then it's my Saturday and my Sunday on top of things. I do have an exception to that rule, and that exception is I pretty much will grant an extension. I mean, if you come to me and you're like, hey, there's this problem on the horizon, could you give me some grace? We'll renegotiate a deadline for you. And the reason I believe in doing that instead is because I think another important skill is learning how to ask for help and learning how to be proactive when you see problems coming. So, if you come to me and you're like, hey, I'm sick, or hey, I got this thing I'm going through, or hey, there are technological issues or whatever, can I get an extension? Chances are I'm going to give you that extension, So, but it's important that you communicate those things with me ahead of time. Let's see. Next, online communication. Like I said, we miss a lot when we're not in person. So, casual text messagey type communication, emails without context, emails where you don't leave your name and your class number, make it very easy for me to misunderstand and make it very easy to miss. Right? And it's not that I want to miss, but I get a lot of emails. I have a lot of students. And so when you are contacting me, it would be great if you gave me your name, the course you were in, some context for what issue you're experiencing, what you've done so far to deal with that issue, and then it really helps me find solutions quicker. Which is typically what we want. You don't have to sound stiff or formal, but proofread your posts. Make sure that you're being respectful. Try to extend the conversation. Make something like a real contribution to the discussion, the way you would make a contribution at a cocktail party. Instead of saying oh, I agree, blah, 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 which is what everyone does. You can agree, but then you should be adding something new to that conversation too, right? It is not enough just to say, I agree, and then repeat what your classmate said. Email me, reach out on Canvas, show up to my office hours. 3 best ways to get in contact with me. Limit distractions when you're doing the projects. Sorry, I don't know what that was. And, you're going to need an active internet connection. And you should probably make sure that you have an active internet connection right around the time due dates occur. This is a very active process. It takes a lot of attention. You got to show up consistent. You got to manage your time. You got to communicate clearly. You got to ask for help. You got to stay engaged. I know that seems like a lot. It will totally improve your experience in this class, and it will improve your grade, which is why I'm sharing this with you. That's just kind of the housekeeping part of us getting through an online class. Now I want to take a minute and we're going to shift focus. I'm going to talk to you generally about communication theory, right? Like what it means, why we study it, why it's such an important class for you in your development through graduation. Like I said, it's a required course. So in its very simplest, base level, right? Theory are metaphors we use to understand human behavior. In human language, and we'll talk about this, all human language is essentially a metaphor. And so we also use terms like framework, right? So we build this little box, and in this box we make a claim about how humans behave when they communicate. Or sometimes it's a model, right? Sometimes we'll diagram it. I tend to think in terms of theory are these kind of lenses you put over your understanding of reality, kind of like the way, if you take a red film paper, put it against your eyes, it filters out certain things, right? And you see a bunch of red, right? And you can change the color of the film, right? And it filters and highlights different things. That's how I tend to think of theory, right? These are mental frameworks that, based on observation and discussion and repetition, lead us to be able to make predictive claims about human behavior. And that's really what a theory is. A theory is a predictive claim about human behavior, right? So what would be an easy one to think about? Well, right, so we have this notion, right, of communication as a sender-receiver model, right? So the theory would be, I intend to communicate meaning, and I speak words. And you intend to understand meaning, and you hear those words and interpret those words. And what I have claimed I've said has been accurately translated, right? That's sender-receiver model, right? But that's a very simple model, and there's all kinds of assumptions that I'm making that might not be the case, right? What if my intention is to deceive, right? And then I'm communicating, and the intention is not to share my meaning, right? The intention is to hide my meaning. And maybe you are not listening in a spirit of openness. You are listening to be right, to find the flaw. Or you are listening intentionally to find something to take offense to, right? Well, now, our theory of this sending and receiving of communication as being this dialogic process where we're both seeking the same thing starts to break down. The better a theory, the fewer circumstances under which it will break down. But almost all theories in the human world break down at some point. They end up being very contextual, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to try and look at specific theories that explain general human behavior, responses, motivations, actions, and then some very specific contextual examples of theory. Now, if you get really good at theory, right, let's say you've developed this framework model lens that really helps you understand and predict human behavior. Well, then the next step is praxis. And praxis is where we would intervene in that process, throw in an experiment, change something, affect something, to try and make things better, more effective. Um, so there used to be for a very long time, believe it or not, miscommunications in the medical field kill people, right? Like if the doctor and nurse, the surgeon, the anesthesiologist are not communicating effectively, right? Mistakes get made and it kills people. So people started to notice this trend. Um, and so, we started to think about this, and then people started to create interventions, right? They started to intentionally train doctors, nurses, surgeons, anesthesiologists, surgical teams, right? How to use the same words and how to get collective understanding of what those terms mean so that they could decrease misunderstanding. That would be an intervention, right? You see a problem happening that you can predict because you've got a good theory of communication. Now you can start to try and solve that problem. At its base, communication theory is a study of how and why humans create, exchange, and interpret messages and symbols. They can be really effective tools to explain patterns, predict outcomes. They can help you read into a situation and develop a good read of a person. They'll help you be more persuasive or more effective. Uh, you know, Theories can hit all kinds of levels from just like a direct process view to they can be like entire world views. They can be entire like constellations of thought that you try to apply as a grand theory, unifying everything. Um, but ultimately, what I have found after years and years of doing this and basically being a paid communicator is that the more theories you are able to understand, the more lenses that you can apply, right? The more agile your mind will be, the more tools you'll have to solve any kind of communication challenge or issue, the more likely you are to interpret a person and a situation accurately, the more empathetic you will become, and the more effective. And that's why it's so important. And that's why theory is a critical part of our job as communication scholars. We have to develop a deep enough insight into the human condition, people's motivations, their drives, their wants, their desires, that we can be our best selves when we communicate with them and when we act in the world. Another important thing from my perspective, especially when dealing with humans, none of this stuff is universal. None of this stuff is true all the time, right? We have to recognize that there are limitations even to the things that we can say and think because our minds are in many ways captured by our language and our perspective and our very singular, unique experience. But if you get good at it, you can do things like explain why conflicts spiral, what will likely happen if you frame a message in a particular way, how you can design a campaign that actually persuades people, how to talk to people in a way that they can hear, how to de-escalate situations, how to escalate situations, and how to understand your own communication behaviors and patterns so that you have control over it. In COMM 300, it's our job to take these kind of implicit theories and to make them explicit, to explain them, to test them, to play with them, to work through them, to talk through them, and understand how these theories help us understand issues like power, identity, and social reality. So, this is one of those classes where really you can get so much out of it. I love teaching this class because when people start to get it, it changes their lives. You'll never look at media the same way. You'll never look at society the same way. That said, you have to really dig into this class because the readings can be difficult. At this level, at junior level, you should be reading journal articles. You should be reading top tier research in our field on this. Maybe not all the time, but you should be comfortable with it. And so a lot of the readings that we're going to be doing are going to be the types of readings that me and your other professors, we read to learn, and we write to share our expertise with others. You're not expected to know them the way someone like me would know them, right? Like, it's not your job to know them. You know, it's my job to know them. But you will be expected to be able to go into those articles and get what is their major contribution, what is their approach, what evidence do they use, and is it useful or not, right? If you can get those 4 things out of a research article, you are right at the level you need to be, and you'll be a much more savvy consumer of information in general. So put yourself into this class. There's a lot to get out of it. I am so looking forward to the rest of the semester. I love getting to know people through their writing. So you have a good one, and I'll talk to you later.